Alright guys, in this video we're going to be removing the rest of the internal components from the transmission. There are going to be a few small things we have to get out of the way before we can start really digging in, but once we're there you'll know. The first thing we're going to do here is we're going to remove the accumulator springs. We're just going to go ahead and set them right back on top of the cover, basically where they would be sitting if they were inside the transmission still, just so that they're out of the way. Next, we're going to have to remove the sprockets and chain. We just pull them all up as one assembly, and they'll come straight out. Just keep in mind that there are thrust washers on the bottom of each sprocket. You can actually see the black one on the left there. You just want to keep that in mind so you don't drop and lose them. Next, we have to remove these 3 roll pins. Keep in mind that the one marked with purple is going to have to be removed differently than the 2 marked with red. What I'm going to do to remove these is I'm going to tap them with a hammer until they're flush with the surface they're mounted in. And then once I have them flush, I'm going to use a modified pick that I made. And I'm basically just going to use it as a drive pin. If you have a set of drive pins, you should be able to do this a little bit easier than I did. This pick just happened to have a diameter that's slightly smaller than the roll pin itself. Once I have the pin most of the way through, I put a magnet on it so that once I actually do push it all the way through, it won't fall further into the transmission. Here's a comparison of the size of the pick to the size of the pin itself. On the opposite side here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a screwdriver that has a 1/4 inch drive end, and I'm going to use that as my drive to get it flush with the surface. And then once I get it flush again, I'm going to go back to the modified pick. And you'll see once again, once it's most of the way through, I'll put that magnet on the pin so that it doesn't try rolling off and falling somewhere I can't reach it. For the 3rd pin, what I had to do here was actually use a 3/64 hex key, and I had to hammer it in just slightly until it got a good grip inside of the pin, and then I twisted it clockwise while pulling upwards on it until it finally came loose and popped out. It didn't take too much effort. It did take a minute or 2 of twisting just to be sure I wouldn't end up damaging the pin, but it worked in the end. Now with all of those roll pins out of the way, what we can do is we can slide this shaft out of the way. All you really do is you pull on it and it'll slowly work its way out. If you get caught, you just twist a little bit and it'll make a little bit more progress. You are going to be held up by the little 2 pieces that were held onto the shaft by the first 2 roll pins. All you gotta do is just kind of slide them until they're out of the way and let go. And then it should pop pretty much right out of the entire case. And this rod here can just simply be removed by pulling it upwards. It will try to get caught on a few things, but it shouldn't be too much trouble. And once it's removed, there's a seal on the far side that you'll have to remove as well. You can just pry it out with a screwdriver. Now with all of the smaller components out of the way, we're going to move on and we're going to pull out this sprocket support. All you do is you just pull straight up, it comes right out pretty easily. That bearing I'm going to end up just dropping back in, so don't mind that for now, but there is a thrust washer that should be attached here. You may want to check the condition of it before putting the part aside just to make sure it's not damaged. Assuming that the bearing didn't just come out with your stator support like it did for me, you can easily reach down with a 90-degree pick straight down the shaft and it'll come right up with almost no effort. You may want to inspect it and set it aside. There will be a plastic thrust washer almost embedded in it. That's perfectly fine. Now with that 90-degree pick again, you're just going to pop out this little piece of plastic. All that does is retain the overdrive band. And then using the pick once again, you reach down to the overdrive band and pop that half up. And then you may have to wiggle it around a bit, but the other side should come loose once you get it just in the right spot. Next, we're going to move back to the bottom of the transmission for just a minute. In order to remove these loop tubes, we have to remove the 2 brackets that are in the way. They're just held on by two 8mm bolts each. Now I ended up cutting ahead of here slightly, but all I really had to do for the first two tubes was use my hands and give it some force, and it ended up popping them out pretty easily. You can just take those and set them aside. For the third tube, the top part I was able to get loose by hand, but there is a sort of a middle runoff on the tube. The bottom is actually freestanding to begin with, but that little middle pipe, I ended up having to use a piece of wood to pry. I ended up just using this wood-handled tool. I decided to use wood to avoid damaging the aluminum case. For the last tube, all I ended up doing was prying at a 45-degree angle with the same tool. You could probably do this with a regular pry bar, but you do have to pry at an angle, like I said, because the holes themselves are drilled at that angle. Otherwise, the tube might not even come out, or you could potentially damage it. For this part, you're going to need an E10 external Torx socket. It is a rare socket, but you do want to be sure to use it because you don't want to damage this bolt. It is a specialty. It has a shoulder after the threads, as well as another smaller shoulder, so you want to be very careful not to damage this. The next two bolts are simply two 10mm bolts, if I recall correctly. You just pop them right off without any issue, really. Again, they do take some force, but it's not that bad. And once you get those out of the way, you can pull this entire small bracket off. And with that bracket out of the way, the parking pawl is going to pop outwards towards you. Once you have that there's going to be a pin retaining the parking pawl. You just have to pull that downwards. It should come right out. And then the whole parking pawl will come with it. Now we're going to dig into the meat and potatoes here, the transmission disassembly. What you're going to do first is remove the front sun and shell assembly. I actually removed it in 3 separate pieces here, but it's still basically the same idea. Be careful not to lose any parts though while you're removing it. Now go ahead and grab your trusty 90-degree pick and go ahead and remove the reverse clutch and planet assembly. It's pretty easy, but you do have to be careful not to have the pick slip out and try to drop your entire assembly. You really just have to take care while you're pulling it out, and you should be able to get it out pretty easily here. Now with that out of the way, you can go ahead and get access to the front planet and rear ring gear. It should all come out as one assembly. You can just kind of grab onto the part that surrounds the shaft and pull straight up and it'll come right out. Now we can remove the rear sun gear, drum, and bearing. With the drum out of the way, there could be a bearing resting in the bottom. It might come up with the drum, just be sure to check for it. Next, we'll go ahead and remove the intermediate band. Next is probably the most difficult part of this disassembly, honestly. There's a ring gear right around the bottom of this shaft. You can sort of see it there, right below where the teeth come out. And what you have to do is you have to reach in through the bottom of the transmission through a small notch, and you can push against the ring in order to get it loose, and then using your fingers coming through the top, you just go ahead and pull upwards on it until it comes out so that it doesn't try to pop back into its groove. It's a little bit difficult, but you can get it. If the ring isn't actually covering the small hole in the bottom of the transmission, you may just have to pry on it inside of the case and try to be careful not to damage any machine surfaces. Alright, so I made a mistake here on the next part. You actually don't have to remove this piece separately. It will actually just come out along with the rest of the final drive assembly. All you have to do to remove it with the assembly is just grab the shaft, just like I do here, and just pull straight up. It'll come right out without any issue. Keep an eye out for this washer and bearing, as they may stay at the bottom of the case, but usually they end up coming up with the final drive assembly. And the last part you have to remove from inside the case is this ring gear, and it just comes straight out as well. Alright, with everything out of the transmission, that's going to be the end of this video. Next time, we're going to work on disassembly of one of the sub-assemblies. I haven't decided which one I'm going to start with, but we'll find out once we get there. Thanks for watching, and I hope I see you in the next one.